Welcome, everyone, to today's deep dive. We've got a really fantastic stack of notes in front of us today, and our mission is all about demystifying a very specific and, frankly, a very fascinating piece of educational architecture.
Yeah, it's a big one today.
It is. We're looking at a comprehensive breakdown of mastering the AP Human Geography exam structure. So we're going to take the hood off this thing, look at the engine, and figure out exactly how this exam is built piece by piece. But more importantly, we want to figure out what it actually asks students to do when they sit down with that booklet. And I want to speak directly to you listening right now, whether you're currently prepping for this specific test, maybe you're helping someone who is, or you're just an insanely curious learner who loves understanding how things work. This dive offers such a revealing look at how we measure human understanding of the world. It's so much more than just a standard high school test.
It really is. And we need to establish that right out of the gate, I think. Because when people hear the word geography, they usually default to this incredibly outdated idea of rote memorization.
Right, like pointing at a map.
Exactly. They picture a student pointing at a map and naming state capitals, or regurgitating the exact length of a river. But this assessment isn't about memorizing static facts on a globe. It's a highly sophisticated evaluation of complex global systems.
So it goes way beyond just the where.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
It tests how well a person understands the human footprint on the Earth, how societies interact with their environments, and how those interactions ripple out to affect everything from local economies to global politics.
Yeah.
It's essentially an evaluation of critical thinking disguised as a geography test.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the blueprint of this exam is a masterclass in assessment design. Let's start with the overarching architecture. If you're sitting down for this exam, you're strapping in for a total runtime of 2 hours and 15 minutes.
Which is a marathon.
Right. And that time is split right down the middle into two main sections. You've got your multiple choice section and your free response section.
And the weighting of that split is where we see the test creator's philosophy loud and clear. It's perfectly balanced. The multiple choice section carries exactly 50% of the overall exam score, and the free response section carries the other 50%. They're demanding a completely balanced skill set.
So you can't just lean on one strength.
No, you really can't.
Yeah.
You can't just game the system by being a great guesser on multiple choice questions, and you can't just rely on your ability to write eloquently in the free response section to hide a lack of factual knowledge. You have to demonstrate mastery in both formats equally.
Which begs the question, what exactly are we trying to prove mastery of? Our sources highlight that the entire exam is built around 3 foundational pillars, or what they call the big ideas.
Right, the core themes.
Yeah. The first one is patterns and spatial organization. The second is impacts and interactions. And the third is spatial processes and societal change. On paper, those sound like massive, abstract concepts.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, those 3 big ideas aren't just isolated vocabulary words. They're the analytical lenses through which the entire subject is viewed. And the exam description points out that these 3 concepts are stretched across 7 distinct units of instruction. So the course covers everything from population and migration to cultural patterns, political geography, agriculture and rural land use, cities and urban land use, and finally, industrial and economic development.
Wow, so it's covering almost every facet of the human experience.
Precisely. And the test creators are heavily emphasizing that they want to see students analyze these as dynamic systems.
What do you mean by dynamic?
Well, they want to know if you can look at a pattern of human migration, for example, and understand the spatial organization of it. Like, where are people moving from and to? Then what's the impact on the destination city? And finally, what societal change does that spatial process trigger? It's about movement, consequences, and interconnectedness.
So we're talking about geography and motion.
Exactly.
Let's look at how they actually test that motion under pressure, starting with Section 9. The multiple choice gauntlet. I'm calling it a gauntlet because the specs on this are intense. You have exactly 60 minutes to answer 60 questions.
A minute a question.
That's 1 minute per question. It's a total mental sprint.
It's a sprint, but it isn't just a straightforward race of reading text and picking A, B, C, or D. The section features individual questions, sure, but it also features set-based questions.
Yeah, where multiple questions are tied to one prompt.
Right. The cognitive load it takes to navigate those sets at a 1 minute per question pace is just massive.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting, because you aren't just reading paragraphs of text. According to the breakdown, 30 to 40% of these multiple choice questions require the test taker to analyze stimulus materials.
Yeah, that's a huge chunk.
So you're constantly shifting gears. The sources list the exact types of stimuli they throw at you. We're talking maps, tables, charts, graphs, images, infographics, and even landscapes. 1 minute per question while analyzing a qualitative landscape photo. My heart rate is spiking just thinking about it. How do students not just freeze up?
A lot of them do, to be honest, because that variety is intentionally disruptive. The breakdown notes that these visual clues are roughly evenly divided between quantitative and qualitative sources.
So math and art, basically.
Exactly. Think about the mental gymnastics it requires. Quantitative sources, like a dense demographic table or a chart showing GDP per capita, require a highly analytical, mathematical way of processing information, using a very specific part of your brain.
Right, you're crunching data.
But then, 60 seconds later, you're looking at a qualitative source. Maybe it's a photograph of an urban landscape or an infographic about cultural diffusion.
Right, completely different skill set.
Suddenly, you aren't crunching numbers. You're using observational skills, cultural interpretation, nuance. The exam is purposely demanding a completely balanced analytical mind. It forces the student to rapidly toggle back and forth between left brain data crunching and right brain visual synthesis.
That's a huge cognitive pivot to make every 60 seconds.
It's exhausting.
Now, to navigate all of that, the sources note there are 5 key geographic skill categories being tested, but they don't all carry the same weight.
No, they don't.
The heaviest emphasis in this multiple choice sprint is placed on 2 specific areas. First, concepts and processes, which makes up a massive 25 to 36% of the section, and second, spatial relationships, coming in at 16 to 25%.
Which perfectly aligns with those big ideas we discussed earlier.
How so?
Well, concepts and processes is the test checking to see if you actually understand the theoretical framework of how human societies operate. Do you know the models? Do you understand the theories?
The foundational stuff.
Right. But spatial relationships, that's the very core of what makes this a geography exam. Can you look at that chart or that map and understand why things are happening where they're happening?
Ah, okay.
How does distance affect economic interaction? How does the physical layout of a city dictate its social disparities? If you can't grasp spatial relationships, the visual stimuli won't make any sense to you.
So if I'm a student, my brain is already pretty fried after that 60-minute sprint, but then the whole terrain of the test changes. We transition to section 2, the free response questions, or FRQs.
The dreaded FRQs.
Yeah, the setup here is completely different. You have 75 minutes, but you only have to answer 3 questions. But each of these 3 questions is worth 7 points, and they're incredibly dense.
They're dense because the source material emphasizes that these aren't simple, one-off essay prompts. They're described as authentic geographic situations or scenarios.
Authentic meaning real world.
Exactly. The test is essentially placing the student in the role of a working geographer. You're presented with a real-world scenario and you're forced to describe, explain, and apply the concepts and models you've learned to that specific situation.
And the notes point out you can't just rely on one chapter of your textbook to save you here. Each of these 3 FRQs integrates content from at least 2 different instructional units. It forces cross-unit integration. So you might be looking at a scenario that requires you to pull knowledge about agricultural models, say, from Unit 5, and seamlessly combine it with knowledge about urban development from Unit 6, just to formulate your answer. You have to show how farming practices influence city sprawl.
What's fascinating here is the structural pacing of these 3 questions. The test designers have created this incredibly clever tiered escalation of stimuli.
Tiered escalation. Okay, walk us through that.
Sure. Question 1 contains absolutely no stimulus. It's purely text-based. You're relying entirely on your foundational knowledge and your ability to pull concepts from memory to answer the prompt.
So it's basically a blank canvas.
Exactly. Then you move to question 2, and the difficulty ratchets up. Question 2 contains exactly 1 stimulus.
Like a map?
Maybe a data set, an image, or a map. Now you have to marry your internal knowledge with this external piece of evidence. Finally, you reach question 3, which contains 2 stimuli. It might be a combination of a data table and a conflicting map.
So they intentionally wait until the very end of the 2-hour exam, when you're at your absolute most exhausted, to throw the most complex dual stimulus scenario at you.
That's the design. It gradually tests a student's ability to synthesize increasing amounts of real-world data under pressure. It's one thing to explain a concept in a vacuum on question 1. It's another thing entirely to explain a concept while simultaneously analyzing two charts that represent a real-world scenario on question 3.
That's brutal.
The cognitive demand peaks right before the pencils go down.
And as you're navigating that peak, the sources explicitly mention a very specific type of analysis you have to perform: scale analysis.
Yes.
At least 2 out of the 3 FRQs will test your ability to analyze spatial relationships across different geographic scales. So you can't just look at a map and say, okay, here's what's happening globally. You have to demonstrate that you can slide up and down that geographic scale fluidly.
Right, because geography doesn't happen at just one level.
Yeah.
Think of the interstate highway system as an example. If you zoom out to a national scale, that system connects a country's economy. It's a massive engine for trade. But if you zoom into a local scale, that exact same highway system physically bulldozed and divided specific urban neighborhoods, fundamentally altering local demographics.
Wow, yeah.
Scale analysis is proving you understand that a single phenomenon looks completely different depending on how closely you zoom in.
That's a great way to visualize it. And while you're doing all that mental gymnastics sliding up and down the scale, your actual written answers are being judged against very specific criteria.
Very specific.
The source material highlights the task verbs used in these prompts. Words like compare, define, describe, explain, and identify. For an audience that knows their way around academic tests, we all know verbs matter. But how strict is the grading here?
It's notoriously strict. The readers grading these exams are trained to ruthlessly hunt for exact alignment with those verbs.
Ruthlessly.
Oh, yeah. If a prompt says identify, you just point out the trend. But if the prompt says explain, graders are hunting for the how and the why.
So you can't just describe what you see.
No. A student might write a beautifully eloquent, highly detailed paragraph describing a geographic phenomenon. But if their verb was explain and they didn't get into the mechanics of why that phenomenon exists or how it functions, they get 0 points.
0. Just for missing the nuance of the verb?
Even brilliant students fail because they write descriptive paragraphs instead of analytical ones. You have to answer the question that's actually being asked.
Leaving points on the table just because you misread the verb is brutal. So let's pull back the curtain a bit more on how this all comes together to form a final grade. We talked about the 7 units of instruction. The notes provide a fascinating breakdown of how those units are weighted in the multiple choice section.
This is key.
Unit 1, which is called Thinking Geographically, makes up 8 to 10% of the section. But then units 2 through 7 carry an equal weight of 12 to 17% each. Why the disparity?
Because Unit 1 is essentially the toolkit. It's the foundational concepts, the maps, the models. Units 2 through 7 are the actual application of those tools to the real world.
The population patterns, the agriculture.
The cities, exactly. The equal weighting across those remaining 6 units is very telling. It means you can't skip a unit and hope for the best.
You can't just cram one subject.
You can't decide you're going to focus heavily on political geography, but totally ignore industrial development. The test is designed to ensure you have a comprehensive, balanced understanding of the entire human experience.
So what does this all mean for the final score? You've run the 60-minute gauntlet, you've climbed the escalating mountain of the 3 FRQs, and you've carefully crafted your answers based on the task verbs. How is this monumental effort actually judged?
This brings us to a really vital philosophical point about the scoring. The AP exam is what we call criterion referenced. This is explicitly stated in the sources, and it's a massive distinction. It means the exam is not norm-referenced, and it's absolutely not graded on a curve.
Wait, hold on. Because there's a huge misconception out there that AP tests are fiercely competitive and graded on a bell curve, where only a certain percentage of kids are allowed to get the top score.
Right.
How does criterion referencing actually work in practice if an entire class aces it?
That misconception causes so much unnecessary anxiety. In a norm reference test, a bell curve, your score is dependent on how everyone else does. You're competing against the person sitting next to you.
Right, there are winners and losers.
If everyone is a genius, your great score might look average. But in a criterion reference test like this one, the person sitting next to you is totally irrelevant. You're being scored entirely on whether or not you've met a predetermined set of specific criteria.
So it's just you against the rubric.
Just you against the rubric. If you demonstrate the required level of mastery, you get the points. If every single person taking the test across the globe demonstrates that mastery, every single person gets a top score. You're competing against the standard, not against the crowd.
That shifts the entire psychological dynamic of the test. It makes it an objective measure of your own understanding, not a gladiatorial arena.
Exactly.
So the mechanics of getting that final score, it's a hybrid process. You have the raw scores from the multiple choice section, which are machine scored, fast objective data.
Hmm.
Then you have the raw scores from the free response section, which are human scored. Real people sit down, look at your task verbs, look at your scale analysis, and evaluate your reasoning. Those two raw scores are then weighted.
Remember, 50% each.
Right. Combined and mathematically converted into the final AP score, which is a composite scale of 1 to 5.
It's a rigorous process, but it's a remarkably fair one. The combination of machine-scored breadth and human-scored depth ensures that a student's final score of a 1, 3, or 5 is a highly accurate reflection of their geographic literacy. It's incredibly difficult to fake your way to a 5.
This has been such a revealing deep dive. When you look at the sheer density and the incredibly clever design of the AP Human Geography exam, it really shifts your perspective.
It's an impressive piece of design.
It isn't just a hurdle for high school students to jump over. It's a beautifully constructed instrument that balances the rapid-fire recall of multiple choice concepts with deep, multi-layered free response synthesis. It demands a balanced mind, cross-unit integration, and the ability to view the world through a deeply analytical lens, shifting from quantitative data to qualitative observation on a dime. And for you listening right now, the biggest takeaway here goes far beyond test prep. The next time you're reading a news article and you look at a chart, a map, or even just a photograph of a landscape, you can apply these exact geographic skill categories.
Absolutely.
You can look at that image and analyze the spatial relationships, ask yourself about the concepts and processes at play, and better understand the complex systems shaping the world around you. You don't need to be sitting in an exam room to think geographically.
And that leads to a perfect final thought to leave everyone with. If the ability to analyze spatial relationships across different geographic scales is the ultimate test of human geography, how might applying this exact framework, zooming in and out from the local to the global, change the way you interpret the biggest news stories happening in your own community right now?